Welcome to this section-by-section guide to the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association Code of Ethics. We focus on ethics as a lived relational practice, guiding professional conduct, protecting the public, and supporting ethical judgment. Ethical decisions are rarely simple one-code problems. The code organizes practice into sections A through I, and the articles are cross-referenced because issues often involve multiple standards at once. Use key steps like consulting the code, checking the standards of practice, seeking consultation, and documenting your rationale. In practice, the strongest ethical answer prioritizes client welfare and context, including transparent and careful documentation and professional consultation. The code names 6 ethical principles: beneficence, fidelity, non-maleficence, autonomy, justice, and societal interest. It also includes multiple decision lenses, such as principle-based, virtue-based, and the wise practices lens, acknowledging the importance of Indigenous ways of knowing alongside Western knowledge. Ethical decisions require documented, contextual, and accountable judgment. Ethics are complex, and there is often more than one ethically defensible path. The code gives anchors, not automatic answers. Ethical practice requires counselors to pause, consider competing responsibilities, consult when needed, and explain their reasoning carefully. It's about using the rule, relationship, context, consultation, and professional judgment together. Being ethical doesn't mean avoiding mistakes, but responding with honesty, humility, and care. This includes naming what happened, assessing the harm to the client, consulting supervisors or legal guidance, and working transparently to repair harm when needed. A helpful promise is to be honest, take accountability, and work toward repair. Section A, Professional Responsibility, focuses on competence, rights, and care. Key articles address lifelong competence, informed representation of qualifications, consultation as an ethical practice, diversity responsiveness, and planning for continuity of care if practice ends. For example, treating complex trauma requires training, supervision, or referral, not just enthusiasm. Professionalism means accountability, not invulnerability. Consultation protects clients and strengthens judgment, and addressing serious ethical concerns about a colleague is part of accountability. A8 asks counselors to seek informal resolution for concerns about colleagues, when feasible, before formal reporting. Section B, Counseling and Therapy Responsibilities I, covers client welfare, confidentiality, and informed consent. B2 names exceptions to confidentiality, like clear or imminent danger. B4 requires informed consent throughout therapy. If a client suggests harming a named person, B2 and B3 guide a safety response and reasonable care to warn and protect, which supersedes simple confidentiality. Section B, Part 2, addresses boundaries and systems. B8 asks counselors to avoid, justify, limit, and carefully manage multiple relationships, clarifying that not all dual relationships are automatically violations. B12 prohibits sexual contact with clients. B18 requires proactive clarity regarding third-party sharing, especially with mandated clients. Section C, Assessment and Evaluation, emphasizes that assessment is never just scoring. C2 requires informed consent for the purpose, measures, risks, benefits, and sharing. C3 requires documented competence. C10 requires attention to diversity, accommodations, and the representation of clients in standardization samples. Section D, Professional Research and Knowledge Translation, extends ethical practice to scholarship. D1 requires ethical review and legal/cultural alignment. D5 protects participant identity. D10 requires accurate credit, particularly for student thesis or dissertation work. Section E, Clinical Supervision Services, protects clients, supervisees, and the public. E4 states that client welfare and public protection are primary, meaning supervisors may need to gatekeep. E5 asks supervisors to balance challenge and support. E2 requires informed consent with supervisees and clients, especially regarding documentation and information sharing. Section F, Consultation Services, confirms that individual responsibility and liability are not diminished by the context. F3 requires voluntary relationships, understood goals, and ongoing informed consent. F5 cautions against using consultation as a form of client recruitment and warns against conflicts of interest. Section G, Counselor and Therapist Education and Training, relates to teaching and training. G3 mandates ethical orientation to the code. G10 requires informed consent and safeguards for self-growth activities. G6 and G11 address power, privilege, and boundaries in faculty-student relationships. G14 requires students to inform clients of their trainee status. Section H, Use of Electronic and Other Technologies, addresses risks and responsibilities. H2 requires consent and a discussion of risks for internet-based communication. H4 requires documented competence, digital security, client suitability, and tailored consent for technology use. H1 covers digital records and security, while H3 clarifies the purpose of technology use. H6 applies professionalism and confidentiality to personal technology and social media. H7 addresses jurisdiction across locations for remote practice. Consider if email, risks, response time, and limits were explained and consented to, even if a client initiates contact. Section 1, Indigenous Peoples, Communities, and Contexts, is framed by humility and not knowing. I1 requires knowledge of historical and contemporary harms. I2 requires reflection on self-location. I3 rejects pan-Indigenous assumptions. I5 and I10 require clarity, cultural guidance, boundaries of competence, and community approval before participating in traditional practices or using Indigenous knowledge. When facing an ethical dilemma, name the relevant articles. Look for hidden layers, such as power, culture, or technology. Consult and document your rationale. Ethical practice may look like compliance, but it is fundamentally made visible. Refer to the CCPA 2020 Code of Ethics for the full reference.